Hello, and welcome back to the Safety Gambit podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Polic. On this podcast, we talk about the risks we take as humans and the culture of safety we create at home and at work as a result. I started this year doing a career series, and today I'm excited to dive into a transformative conversation with Jim Bishop, who is a remarkable figure in the area of leadership coaching. It's been really fun getting to know him as we prepared for this episode. Now, you might be wondering why a safety podcast is delving so deeply into career matters. Well, let's consider this. Education, skills, and career are fundamental components of one's overall happiness in this experience that we're having, and it is one of the 4 pillars of human safety. It's important for us to evaluate our standing within each of these pillars so that we can pinpoint unnecessary risks that might be lurking or where hazards persist unaddressed day after day. Let's be honest, the stressors of daily life are escalating, and a significant contributor to this is our professional lives. According to the Gallup 2023 State of the Global Workplace Report, CEO Jim Clifton underscores the profound impact of poor management not only on business outcomes, but on individual well-being. Gallup's research reveals a startling truth. Being stuck in a job you despise is more detrimental than being unemployed. Can you imagine? And these negative emotions seep into our personal lives, straining our family and our friend relationships. It's a sobering reality. Without thriving in our work, we're unlikely to thrive in life. Remember, we can't separate our work life from our home life. Physically, sure, maybe, but not mentally. They affect each other. Recent trends we have seen paint a troubling picture that we still are seeing individuals silently leaving their job, while a mere 23% report being engaged at work. This really resonated with me as I read it because I think back to the episode with Carolyn Sweeney, where she shed light on job seekers covertly seeking additional remote employment, which just underscores the inability to be fully invested in one's primary job. Then how do you factor in somebody's life in that when you're juggling 2 jobs? In today's episode, we're going to explore various factors of the modern workplace, including what the modern employee expects from work, how do we make workplace transformations stick, and how do we find resilience in the midst of uncertainty? Let me tell you a little bit more about Jim. With over 2 decades of immersive experience in executive development, corporate leadership, and human performance, Jim Bishop stands as a beacon of transformative leadership through his business, Conjunction Leadership. Jim's journey has taken him across the globe, coaching executives, diverse teams, and orchestrating the modernization of leadership systems for transforming business units. As a certified coach by the International Coaching Federation and a certified leadership facilitator with Blanchard, Jim's methods are a blend of science and art. He empowers executives through executive coaching, corporate culture consulting, and team effectiveness programs, focusing on holistic development within volatile context. It has been so fun, as I mentioned, getting to know Jim's work, and I'm thrilled to share it with you today. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you to check out Scout & Cellar Clean Crafted Wine. I have a quiz in the show notes. Once you do that quiz, you'll get a 15% off your first order. It's literally 5 to 6 questions, so I think you should check it out. Stop feeling guilty for drinking wine. I know I have. I know I'm not giving it up, so I'm just picking the cleanest option I can. So choose Scout & Cellar. Thank you again for tuning in. Your commitment to safety is not only important to yourself, but for everyone around you. Before you listen to this interview, I'd like to ask you for your support in spreading the word about our podcast. Please take a moment to leave a review, rate the show, and share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Together, we can reach more people and make a bigger impact on promoting safety and how we blend mental and physical safety in our day-to-day lives. As you head out into the world, remember that safety is a choice we make every day. Whether you're at work, home, or out and about, prioritize safety in everything you do. Your actions matter, not just for yourself, but the well-being of those around you. Let's all commit to making safe choices and looking out for each other. Stay safe, stay informed, and until next time, take care. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the Safety Gambit podcast.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to this conversation today. I love having leadership coaches and those in this space on the podcast because I think whether you're in safety or in some other industry, it is all applicable. And even in our personal lives, we can take something from these conversations and apply them to work or at home. Before we jump in, I would love for you to introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about you and what you do.
Well, I am a leadership and executive coach. Into this business from 25 years in corporate America. I was trained as a scientist in college and entered the world as a scientist to begin with. And most of my time while I was doing scientific consulting, I was working with people who kept asking me questions about people, not about science. And I realized there was an unsolved problem there that, and people, as far as I could see, were probably always going to be the challenge in terms of making systems and structures and getting the products built and on the market that we wanted. So I started pivoting my career and moved a little bit more into leadership development, training and development, worked a little bit in talent management, succession management, some things in HR, and then started in executive coaching and really found my niche there. So today I have the opportunity to have my own practice. I work with midlife executives, generally between the age of 35 and 52, somewhere around in that space when the world isn't what it used to be anymore. And they're not sure how to show up anymore because the things they wanted are sometimes not the things that they want now. And so just helping people become more adaptable, more human centric, and building cultures and teams around them that bring the organization to a whole new level of productivity. So.
Well, thank you for what you do. I find myself in this window of people that you work with. And when I left corporate America, as I think back, I can relate to some of the things that you're saying. It was hard to navigate leadership. It was hard to navigate what was going on and what the next steps were. So I appreciate that you saw a calling for yourself to branch out and share your knowledge and skills with this group of people, this, middle sort of group that is looking to expand and grow, but might not know exactly how.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to digging in further too. So
yeah, let's start with just modern employee expectations of work. What are you seeing, especially after a couple of years of pandemic? Definitely things look a lot different today than they did 3-4 years ago. You've been in business through that whole time, but what are you seeing? What are employees expecting at work these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have seen a seismic shift over the last 4 years, I'll say. Up to that point, a lot of people were still kind of in the mindset that you find a good job and you hunker in and you do a good job for your employer. And at the end of it, there's a gold watch or some sort of retirement package for you, right? Well, a lot of us in this space right now have grown up in an environment where that's not always true, right? You can get to age 40 or 50 and realize there's a couple downsizings that you did nothing about or that was no fault of your own. And yet you find yourself in the musical chairs game and trying to hold on. I think what has happened is as we went through the pandemic, right, there were a lot of opportunities for people to see the value of their time. We no longer had commute times. We could do meetings more efficiently than we used to. We could meet with people around the world at a moment's notice using technologies, which were always there, but we just weren't using them to our advantage. And when people were able to put a value on their time, what they started realizing was time is fleeting. Time is a thief. And I want more from my life than just the gold watch. So while I was doing a good job at my employer, I don't know if I was doing a good job in life. And I think that also affected our leaders during that period of time, not just the major employee base, but also the people trying to lead them. And when that collision happened, and then we had the insecurity of the pandemic on top of it, and we had some of the social unrest things that were particularly going on here in North America. And when all of that started to happen, people were realizing I'm a whole person and I have all of these things and I want all of these things. And the things where I used to find them in my community or my churches or my synagogues, my schools, those institutions were not as prominent anymore. So they looked primarily at their employer as the institution to help them become a better human, to become a better whole person. And some of our leaders were horribly inept at that and sometimes distracted because what they were really just trying to do was keep the business open, to keep people employed, to get products to customers and figure out supply chain. what they weren't really thinking about was, how do I allow this whole person mentality to start taking root inside of our culture where people feel heard and valued over some of the things that may not seem business related, social
Oh,
justice issues
exactly.
or whatever it was. And some leaders just didn't know how to handle the tension. And so they shied away from the conversation. And I think some of the resulting great resignation that we saw were probably a result of that, people were looking for a place where they could feel like they belong. And a lot of employers didn't know how to create belonging. So the modern expectation today is that people want to make a difference. People want to know that their work is bigger than just the gold watch or the paycheck. They want to know that the work that the organization that they're working for is not only going to protect them and keep them safe, but also make a difference in humanity. And now we've got Middle East tensions, we've got all kinds of other things happening. And there are people on both sides of the equation in our modern workplaces. And we have to have leaders who also understand how to embrace those tensions, help people feel heard and valued without the division that it naturally causes, and bring us to a whole new level of humanity. And it's quite a challenge.
That gives me actual body chills when you're talking about that. Imagining myself in that situation where you've got employees that are looking up to you on both sides of the issues, potentially, right? Because we're such a melting pot of people here in the States. You've got lots of things to deal with and lots of different emotions. And yeah, that undertaking as a leader, like you said, to just keep the wheels on the bus of the business running and profitable, then to have this human aspect on the other hand, wow, how are people doing this? What without their heads exploding, which I think we've probably seen, like you said, the great resignation. I think not only did we see employees leave because they didn't feel a place of belonging, we probably saw a lot of leaders leave as well, just under the pressure of not knowing what to do or not feeling confident in that role of being able to juggle both of those issues.
Absolutely. I echo that, because many of my clients came during that period of time with what they would call imposter syndrome. Right? I'm supposed to know how to do this, but I don't know how to do this. And candidly, I don't know if I want to know how to do this, because I like the people that I work with and I don't want them to not like me if I'm helping them broker tension and helping them see different ways of doing things. They were afraid of making people upset. I also think that the danger of not embracing that is that people if they don't feel like they belong, then they don't feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they're not playing offense.
Right.
They're always looking in their rearview mirror and trying to play defense. And that kind of a culture gets us into a lot of problems, particularly in your sphere of the world, right? In the safety world, where if we're playing not to lose instead of playing to win, then we're on our heels and not on our toes. And we're not necessarily reporting the near misses, or we're not looking for the things that will help us get ahead and make the wheels on the bus go faster, if you will. Sometimes what we're doing is we're looking at like, who's out to take me down and where do I have to posture and defend, rather than where do I get to play to my best advantage?
Yeah, exactly. You talk about speak up culture. Is this what you're referring to?
In many cases, yeah. I mean, what I see happening in some workplaces, not all, but in some, is that leaders and organizations know they need to have a safe environment. And traditionally, that might have been around the physical safety, right?
Of course, yeah.
And
it's the first thing they think about.
Yeah, as we've gone through this kind of social change a little bit, it's also about emotional safety, emotional security. And I think emotionally, that has to come before the physical safety piece, because if someone feels safe, if they feel connected and they feel insulated, if you will, in their environment, then they're probably going to raise their hand for things that are better for the community, right? They're going to report the things that might get us in trouble or might cause problems down the way, as a means to help the community out, not as a means to like protect themselves from like a CYA type of thing, right? And I've worked with safety organizations or HR organizations, or even some of our manufacturing organizations, when they want to have a safety culture. What they haven't quite remembered is that it takes a different type of leadership to create that safety culture. Managing through metrics is one thing, but you can certainly not just manage through metrics and expect people to feel emotionally secure. You
Yeah.
have to manage through this whole human dynamic, and that takes a different type of a leader, particularly if they've grown up in a highly regulated or highly SOP type of focused culture, where as long as we do the process correctly, the process works. But they forget that humans are the ones running the process.
Right. We're not robots. And
Yeah,
that's exactly what the safety gambit is all about is, showing up to work as a human. And you can't just check that personal life at the door. Like you are one whole human at work or at home, and you're bringing everything with you in both of those cases, right? You could be bringing what's happening at work to home and what's happening at home to work. And that definitely feels like a lot more bricks to put on the pile for a leader to have to tend with. And
absolutely.
like you said, many of these leaders, especially, I'll be curious to ask you about generations too. Is there a generational difference, right? So I think in my mindset, the baby boomers of the workforce right now are probably less equipped or prepared, or even maybe not. I mean, I say this lightly, but willing to weave this into the workforce, right? It's show up, do your job, do a good job. And that's what the expectation is. So I can definitely, it feels like such a heavy thing, but definitely the desire for people showing up in the workplace is to have a mentally safe, a psychologically safe environment, as well as a physically safe environment. So we can't just look at the physical safety anymore. We have to weave into this mental safety. So, what do you think about the generational issues within this creating a psychologically safe work environment, this speak up culture? Are you seeing adaptability in these different generations, or what are you noticing?
Yeah, there are definitely differences in the generations, right? And we can't ignore that. I also have a huge degree of empathy because I think we're all somewhat of a product of the environment we grew up in. And
For sure.
the baby boom generation, and probably even the Gen Xers that are coming right behind there, they're the environment of which we grew up in. If you were to, me as a Gen Xer, majority latchkey children, parents, double income
Same.
families. We
Yep.
raised ourselves. We put ourselves on the bus. We came home. We did our chores and our homework, and sometimes got dinner on the table. And when we had that type of a culture, we just learned to figure things out on our own. And we had kind of an individualist mindset, right? So when we get into this environment and we are leading in this environment, there's a huge amount of our identity that was built in those early years that just said, you just get in and roll your shirt sleeves up and you figure things out and you don't whine about it, right? So I think it's important to remember where we came from, because that's the mindset of which we lead, and that frames the way that we see the people around us. Now, generations behind us, us latchkey kids raised our kids differently, and we put them in jazz, tap, and ballet and said, we want you to be good dancers. And we put them in band and vocal lessons because we wanted you to be musical. And we asked them to play 3 sports, and they did. And what that meant was we ran ourselves ragged driving our children around, but they've never not had a coach beside them at all points that helped them understand what the next level of performance looks like.
Oh, that's a
And then
good
we throw
point.
them into the workforce, and we have Gen Xer managers, and we have the millennials coming right behind them. And the millennials are scratching their head going, well, who's going to help figure this out? Right. But what the millennials were able to do was they know how to connect and adapt things much, much quicker and much faster because we raised them that way. We put them in all of these different situations where they had to practice various skills, right? If we can remember that, they can help us in this environment. And then even the generations that are coming behind them are even more adaptable and more connected. What that means is we just have to lead differently, because eventually there'll be more of them than there are of us. And we can't hold on to our identity going, because I was raised this way, this is the way that I
Mm-hmm.
see to manage. We have to look forward at the culture that's coming ahead of us and saying, how do we adapt our leadership now so that the culture can become what it needs to become for the organizations to thrive and the people in it to grow. And that's where I see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of leaders burning right now, is that
Yeah.
they're wrestling with this piece of me that I don't know that I want to give up, because it's such a part of who I am that if I give it up, I feel like I'm losing something. At the same point in their life when natural faculties. We need to rest a little bit more. We probably need a little bit more mental processing, and we don't want to run as hard as we did in our 20s and 30s. So there's a lot of these shifts that are going on in midlife when people are like, I need to become someone new. But in order to become someone new, I have to set something who I was aside. And I don't like giving things up. And it feels like I'm losing, not winning. You have to see what I'm running towards, not what I'm leaving behind.
Right. That really
So,
resonates me, especially as I'm a Gen Xer as well. And I have a young son, he's 11. And I have friends who have children who are grown out of college. And it's almost like raising, looking at when they raise, having babies right out of high school or, young in college versus having, a child when I was in my 30s is I think the way we raised our children are probably a little bit different, but what you're saying about that and about our future leaders and how us as Gen Xers and baby boomers are trying to sort of struggle with how we grew up, latchkey kids, absolutely being independent, like figure it out for yourself, having a coach. My son is 11 and he does not want to take a lesson for anything. And I'm thinking, like you're saying, these kids have had coaches and I'm thinking he doesn't have any coach. He doesn't want to. So now what am I going to do? But how do people stay like, I guess, resilient in this workforce and in this, I guess, uncertain time of not only for yourself, but within your work environment. So there's a lot of things happening. And I mean, my mind's spinning just us, talking about it a little bit here.
yeah, it's the question that a lot of leaders are asking. And what seems like the answer is usually not the answer, right? Most people want to just work harder. They know what worked for them in the past, and they're trying to regain the past by just doing more of the same. I tell people right now, if you're going to attend to the emotions of others and you're going to make it a psychologically safe environment, or you're going to help this culture of humanity take root in an organization, you yourself first have to go first. You have to become a better human.
Put your own oxygen mask on, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I use that analogy often. If the plane is in turbulence, what do they tell you? They put your own oxygen on before you assist other passengers. Well, that's critically important in this environment. You yourself have to attend to your humanity, right? And for so many leaders, especially those of us, baby boom or Gen Xers, that was not something that we were taught or even modeled. Like, what are emotions? Emotions are something you stuff behind you, right?
Exactly.
Emotions are things that get in the way of your productivity and your grit and your determination. You just strap up or roll up your
bootstraps.
pull up your bootstraps, and you're going to go on. And in today's environment, that does not serve our leadership well, because you have to attend to the emotions that are rising within you, particularly in this midlife stage when things are shifting and you feel like, what I want, I have the car, I have the toys, I have the title, I have the job, I have the spouse or the kids, I have all the things that I thought I wanted. And yet I still don't know if I'm satisfied. And the reason I don't feel satisfied is because I'm craving that purpose and meaning and legacy that I know time is a thief, and I know time is short, and I still want to try and achieve that. But all the things that I put on the altar over here in the sacrifice of success now become more important in this midlife phase. If I am not attuned to those emotions, what's going to rise up within me is shame and fear and guilt and resentment. And then I'm going to harbor it as generational differences, or I'm going to harbor it as, someone's out to get me or take my leadership role.
Sure.
And that is not the case at all.
Sort of deflecting instead of taking ownership. Yeah.
So what will happen is that leader will become irrelevant, not because of the culture around them, but because of their own insecurity within them. So a large part of my job in my work is to help the leader just attend to what is going on in your humanity so that you can help other people in their humanity. And what I mean by that is, like, the human to human interaction is so sparse today. I mean, we're talking on Zoom, right? And it's a short second for actual being in physical relationship with someone. We don't have the water coolers to do it anymore. And we don't have the lunchrooms that we used to in our work environments. We don't have the social connections. You have to harbor that within the context of how we are working today. So
what are some of the tools, maybe if there's a couple top tools that you could share with people, maybe that if they're thinking they're resonating with what you're saying. I know I am guilty. Yes. What are some of the tools that someone could start today to look internally, work on their human piece to be a better leader?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of what I would call like just naming the emotion, right? We often are horrible at having the lexicon to describe what is this experience that I'm sensing. Most of us know anger, and some of us know joy. A lot of us know sadness, but those are the core emotions. But there's a whole recipe and flavoring behind those. Like, what are the derivations that sadness can show up? And then, maybe we get into shame and guilt at some point in time. Maybe we might get into elation or ecstatic feelings. And being able to hold both of those tensions together when you have what I would call the darker emotions along with the happy emotions, you've got both of those, and we're human. We have both at the same time. One of the tools that I often give my clients, particularly male clients who have just learned to rub some dirt on it and not really talk about it, is just what I call the emotion wheel. And you can Google it. There's probably about 12 or 14, maybe 100 different types out there, but it looks like a wheel and it's a rainbow and it has the core emotions in the middle. And as it radiates around the edges, there's a whole lot of descriptions. And when we put that in front of someone and I can tell that something's wrestling inside of them, I just ask them to pick a word out that most likely describes where they're feeling. And it starts giving them the language to describe what's bubbling up. And then we can talk about, well, what's going to happen if we don't attend to that, right? So the phrase I use is emotions make terrible, terrible masters, but they make pretty good servants. Once we learn how to manage them and learn what they are, and they're starting to rise up, it's kind of our navigation system through this midlife journey and through some of the challenges that our culture is facing. But if we don't do that, those emotions are going to rise up in us and they're going to direct our paths because we're either going to run towards them or run away from them. And those are not things that usually get us to where we want to be.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Being able to talk about what you're feeling, name it, put the right words into play, and even I think just acknowledgement, right? Being an awareness and being okay to acknowledge that maybe you're not okay or whatever it is you're feeling, right? Just having that support or tool to be able to talk about what you're feeling and what's happening. I think a lot of people, when they don't have the right words, then you said they just stuff it inside and harbor it. And then that just breeds into all kinds of other unhealthy manifestations.
Yep. I see a lot of people when asked, or, how are you? What's going on? They'll just use the word fine, right? Well, fine is not an emotion. Fine is just an average of everything that you're feeling, right? So I've tried to help people learn there are different ways to express that. So one of my clients picked it up and he actually acknowledges when someone says, well, how are you doing? He'll say, well, I'm about 75% okay today. Right. And that just gives the freedom for somebody else to ask the follow-up question if they want to, or it gives him the freedom to say, I'm not 100% today and it's okay. I'm okay with not being 100%. So
I love that you point out the word fine. I use it a lot. I hear my son use it. My husband uses it. It's like, it doesn't open any sort of conversation. It closes it down. I'm fine. And then you think, okay, well, I can't even ask a follow-up. That shuts it down. It comes with such a feeling of like, okay, you're fine. Great. And then it's the tone that comes with it too. How is someone saying that? So you can read into it, but yeah. One of the things that I've seen you post about and talk about are young boys as leaders and how are we raising them? And I saw your post about it and it touched my heart of like, how are we going to bring these boys up as leaders? I think the generations raising children now are definitely supporting their children, boys as well, in getting in touch with their feelings and being more human about things, right? It's okay to cry. It's okay to be in your feelings. So how are you seeing that translate into leaders? Some people might say, oh, that's going to make our boys soft, or they're not going to be masculine enough. So what do you say around that and around getting in touch with your emotions, naming your emotions, and then raising this next generation of young men and even young girls?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just as, maybe we're telling our young men to get in touch with their emotions, sometimes we're telling our young women not to, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's the yin and the yang of that. Sometimes our young women are growing up thinking they need to be more tough and assertive and bold and dominant because those are the words that we use to describe good leaders of the past, right? And that's what it meant to get ahead. Um, and maybe the opposite of that is then young men were too much of that, and we're telling them they need to be a little bit more in touch with their emotions and the social, emotional, and pro-social type of words that we use today, right? So I'm not saying that we're raising any one gender better than another. I think we need to attend to it. The thing that I really would impress upon people is let's look at what the culture needs, right? Let's look in the
Mm-hmm.
future and say, what do we need? We need leaders who know how to unite, not divide. We need leaders who know how to help people feel belonging and connection. We need people who can break down the barriers and help people feel this safety so that we all bring ourselves to the best sense of humanity that we can and solve some of these complex problems. We no longer have time to be arguing about which side is right. We have to figure out,
Exactly.
how do we collectively want to move ahead? And so some of those things that I get concerned about is it seems like we have a lot more opportunities for young girls early on to develop what I call executive presence, the
Mm.
public speaking skills, the poise, the dignity, the charisma type of conversations. And a lot of our young men are starting to to separate themselves from the opportunities that were once there. There were plenty of public speaking and oratory contests and debate contests, but those are not things that our young men are participating in anymore. They're more naturally attracted to the physical aspects and some of the sporting events or some of the competitive activities. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I also think that our culture has those a little bit out of whack when we're not rewarding people for their ability to speak, or we're not rewarding for people for their ability to unite. We're not rewarding people for their ability to ideate about things that are not currently in the sphere today of knowledge, right? And I get concerned when I start seeing like college entrance exams and people going to college and people graduating from college. And I start seeing that the balance, we strive for 50% balance, male, female. But today in most of our colleges and universities, there are more females than men.
Oh,
And
interesting.
while we have placed a lot of emphasis on getting more women through the educational system and getting them more secondary education, I'm a big fan of that. I also get concerned that there are less boys going from high school into a secondary education setting of any sort, whether it's vocational or not. And they're just not taking advantage of the opportunities, right? And a society that doesn't have the balance of the genders there is going to be a society that we're not getting the best of what we were actually designed to do, right? So,
Interesting. Yeah. For sort of tying this together, how do people make these shifts in the workplace? How do we make these transformations with connecting the psychologically safe work environment with the physical safety of the work environment, with, getting our leaders in touch with their emotions and being able to sort of manage all of that? How do we make those changes stick within the work environment?
yeah. Well, making them stick is one thing. Getting them started is a whole nother, right? So,
Maybe we start at the
for
beginning.
25 years, I tried to do it in a corporate setting. And most corporations, most organizations think about like organizing and structuring things before they think about changing things. And so they would come up with ideas about, we need our culture to be more speak up culture. We need our culture to be more safe. We need our culture to be more whatever. And in leadership development, what we were tasked with was, let's create an experience for a cohort of individuals to get that, right? So I for 25 years put butts in seats and tried to do it through classroom experiences and education. And what I would see is that the people that went through may get inspired, they may get a little bit of understanding, they may get even a little bit of skill, but when they go back to a leader who doesn't yet have that or get that or embrace that, everything falls flat and we wasted a lot of time or money. So today in my work, the way that I know to get it started and the way that I know to get it to stick is to start with a leader who wants to go first. It's in this space of volatility and uncertainty and wrestling and upside downness. If a leader goes silent or gets shameful during that period of time, I can tell you what's going to happen, and it's not going to end well for them or their teams. But if a leader gets curious and they say, I am not done yet, right? And they get into this space, it doesn't work to put them in a classroom because they don't know how to articulate what they're feeling, and they're not going to do that when they don't feel safe. But in this sacred space of a one-on-one coaching relationship, they and I can get really comfortable with who they are, what their insecurities are, or even where they want to go in life. And once they get comfortable and they feel more grounded and more present and more resilient, then what happens is they naturally want to bring the people along beside them and their team. So we'll go to the team and we'll take the same language or some of the same things. We'll do group coaching and maybe even some group experiences. But the difference is the leader has gone first and they see it being modeled. And then once the teams do that, then it comes to the culture. You just take many teams and put them together, and people like us do things like that. That's called our culture footprint. And so we start mapping it. How are we changing? What is showing up? And what are those values that we're seeing expressed in the workplace? I get a lot of well-meaning calls from HR folks who say, we want to create this sort of culture. And really what they want is that brass plaque to hang beside the wall that has all the words on it, right? And I just tell them that's not my job. And it's not the best place to start, because if you put the brass plaque there, but you don't change any mindset around it, no behavior will ever change. And people are going to walk in and out of your office every day and look at that and go, I don't even know what it means.
Right.
So I guess the best way to answer your question is how to get it to stick is the same way to get it to start. And you just start with a leader who is in a place of curiosity and wonder and saying, what can I be? How can I continue to grow? How can I continue to adapt and change, even though I feel horribly inept to lead in this environment? So,
well, I think that goes along with, as people branch out in entrepreneurship or wanting to be a leader, going from just like, I'm working in the lab and I want to be a leader. Like it starts with curiosity. It starts with asking questions and being curious about the answers and taking responsibility for your own journey. Right. And so I had a guest on who said she works with people, but the leaders have to be able to take radical responsibility for their role in what's happening and be ready to acknowledge that and start with themselves. And so you're just echoing that. And I think if everybody starts with themselves, and I even say this around the safety gambit for changing safety culture, is start with ourselves, and then we can create a rippling effect of change. And so what you just described, I feel like is very similar to that.
Yep. We often get frustrated by the things in the world around us that we can't control. And we spend all of our time ideating about how do we get that to change. But in reality is, if we just spent more of our time ideating around the things I can control, which is usually me,
right,
then what I can control and be a better person, be a better change, create a greater culture, whatever it is, then it's going to happen. But when we focus on all the things external to us, it just doesn't work as well.
Yeah. Such a great point. Such a great point. Such a great spot to pause this conversation on. And I'll probably have to have you come back because I feel like we could talk about so many different things. You've got so many great things that you're working on. Before I let you tell people a little bit more about how they can contact you, I have a couple of my own safety gambit questions for you. So the first one is, if you can give an example of a personal safety gambit. So a risk that you took hoping for an advantageous outcome. That could be anything from working, personal, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, this whole journey into entrepreneurship, right? 25 years in corporate America, you kind of learn how to play the game of corporate America. You learn the security of a paycheck. You learn how to get advanced in your career. In 2020, when the world was upside down and I had 2 kids going to college and 3 more behind, I chose to chuck all of that and say, I don't know what this pandemic is going to do, but this is the bet that I'm going to place, is that there's always going to be a need for leaders getting comfortable with who they are. And candidly, I think they'll trust me better when I'm on my own rather than when I'm working for a company. So that was the biggest safety gambit I probably taken. And so far, 4 years hence, I'm not looked back. So
yeah. That's awesome. I would agree that going out on your own in entrepreneurship is a safety gambit. So I love it. How about a safety near miss that you have survived in your life? You live in the Midwest. So is there like some crazy snow car crash with a snowplow or something, or I don't know?
Yeah, I don't have any of those like harrowing experiences. Oops, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't have any of those harrowing experiences that like that. But I do have to say, one of the ones that were, if carrying on this vein of emotional safety, there was a point in my career, I mentioned I have 5 kids. We adopted number 4, found out we were expecting number 5. So my two last are just 7 months apart. And I was at the point in my career where I was growing like I wanted to. Everything seemed to be, at my fingertips. I was getting the promotions. I could see the path. I had the sponsors. I had everything lined up, and it was all working very well, except I was on the road all the time. And as I was on the road all the time in my hotel room, I was sitting there thinking, like, I'm missing out on all the stuff that I really wanted in my life, like back at home. And my wife was taking care of all the details and all the kids and all the stuff. And I was just providing the income. And I didn't feel like I was very connected. To me, that was the biggest near miss that I had, because I started questioning everything in my life that was a blessing. And I started thinking, if only I didn't have this, I would get ahead in my career faster. Or I could do more of this. And I kind of had my world upside down a little bit. The reason I call it a near miss was because I decided at the expense of everything that everybody was telling me was I was on the risk of burnout, and I was on the risk of really mentally breaking down. I decided to take the summer. I took 3 months as unpaid leave, used the FMLA benefit that we had, and we called it the summer of yes. And my family did all the things that the kids would, within reason, asked for. We went fishing, we went to the beach, we did some things like that would just bring the social connections back to our family. What it did for me was lower kind of the pressure cooker. And I just felt like I could breathe again. And it gave me a vision to say, there is more in life, and you can have both. I can have a career and I can have a family, and I'll do this in my own way. And really, the name Conjunction was birthed out of that summer of yes, when I started realizing the power of the and. So I'll call that my near miss, because I got a lot more out of it, but I almost lost it all. I almost looked at everything as if it was a curse instead of a blessing.
I think that's a great example. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. I think we get in our minds, especially in our Gen Xers and, generations above us, is like, we have to do it this way. And we don't always take time to step back and say, well, can I do it a different way? And what does that mean? And yeah, lower the pressure cooker. Oh my gosh, that resonates with me. It's good. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. The last one is, what about a safety pet peeve?
Safety pet peeve.
You have 5 kids. You've got to have a pet peeve.
Shutting off the lights is I don't know that it's a safety pet peeve, but it is a pet peeve. They know how to turn them on. They don't know how to shut them off.
It's very environmental.
We've talked about this over a little bit here around the edges, but my biggest safety pet peeve is when I hear leaders say, I want this safety culture, but they're not doing anything to like become a better leader themselves to get it. I have an example. I worked once with like an ethics and compliance organization, right? And they're really tasked with following procedures and policies and making sure everything is on the up and up. And they wanted this. And they put it all in the writing and the publicity. They did all the right stuff to make sure people knew about it. But the leaders that were leading the organization didn't, when they would speak, when they would talk, I never heard them sharing any personal stories or giving any sense of humanity. They were almost as if they were a robot leading an organization to get people to fall into a line. And I, as an executive coach, I have to bring that up. So I mirrored that back to them. And I'm like, you're telling me that the biggest reason that we might get into an ethics challenge is because people don't speak up about some of the things that they might perceive as fringes, right? Enron didn't wake up one day and choose to become Enron. It was just a small series of little decisions over time that got them into this place. You want those leaders who are noticing those small things up front, but you're not giving them a chance to talk or connect or share or be present. And you do that, they'll do that, right? And so I guess that's my biggest pet peeve is when people say what they want, but they're not really taking time to think through, how do I create that foundation of emotional safety and security so that someone actually will do that without feeling like they're risking their career or outing a leader.
It kind of ties into the do as I say, not as I do, as I say, not as I do, right? I'm telling you guys all to do this, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to show up the same way I expect you to. And I remember when I had people reporting to me, I would always say, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not going to do. I'm not willing, I'm not going to do that. That just doesn't resonate with me. So I think that's connects with what you're saying there. And yeah, I think it's an emotional safety pet peeve for sure, and that's how we build psychologically safe environments. That's how we tie mental safety into physical safety. So I think that's a great way to just wrap it all up together. All right. Well, this has been so fun. Our time has gone extremely, extremely fast. Before I let you go, please tell people how they can find you, where they can see more of your work, connect with you if they're interested in any sort of executive coaching.
Sure. I'm always available on my email. That's the most secure, jim@conjunctionleadership.com. If you want to just kind of follow along the journey, LinkedIn is where I'm most active, posting generally about twice a day on there, thoughts, provoking articles, maybe even some of my own videos and content. And then beyond that, my website, I keep updated, conjunctionleadership.com as well, with the recent podcasts that we've been on, or the articles that we published, or even just some of the experiences and philosophies that we help curate. So
awesome. And I will link your LinkedIn, and I can put your email on there as well in the show notes for people to easily connect with you. I so appreciate this. I feel like every guest I have on the podcast, I learn so much myself, especially as an entrepreneur and as a leader, someone who's trying to, raise a son and into a great leader. All of these things that we talked about today really resonate with me. So I hope they also resonate with my community. So thank you again for being on our podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.